Hello everyone, and welcome to Artists for Everyone. And today we're going to paint a pansy. It's almost time to plant them, and I thought it would be a fun flower to paint with our Artists for Everyone palette. So first I'm going to go over our materials, and I'm using a 4x6 piece of cold press watercolor. This is a little block. This one I'm trying a new paper. It's called Kilimanjaro, and it's made by Cheap Joe's, cheapjoes.com. And it's 100% cotton, cold pressed, 140 pound, original bright white, and it's the same size as the Strathmore watercolor postcard. And I just thought I would try something new and see how it goes. And so far I've been really happy with it. And I'm also using an Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencil by Faber-Castell. If you don't have one, you can also use a regular number 2 pencil. This is a light gray, and I like watercolor pencils for my drawings because the watercolor pencil sort of dissolves into the painting and it gives a nice effect. You could use really any color. I just use light gray. And then I have a Sennelier 000 squirrel mop, and you can also use any pointed round. A size 6 pointed round would be ideal. A size 8 would also be fine. Okay, you want something that's big enough to carry a lot of water and pigment, but fine enough that you can get a nice fine point on it and do small details. I have a little palette here. I have a roll of paper towels and some water, and I'm using my Wild Thorn Artist for Everyone palette, which is my favorite palette right now. So it's beautifully made by my friend Kim, and these colors were selected specifically by us for these projects. And there is more information about those in the description box below. But as always, I will recommend other colors to use. If you don't have this watercolor set and you have other watercolors, that's fine. So any watercolors that you have will be just perfect. So I'd like to begin by drawing our pansy, and I'm going to move some things aside here so I have more room. And we're going to start by drawing a circle, a very, very small circle in the very center of our paper. So that big, very, very small, okay? And then I'm going to draw another circle on the outside of that circle. So basically, I have 2 little circles in the center. And then I'm going to draw the first petal. So pansies basically have 3 petals on the bottom that are sort of symmetrical, and then they have 2 petals on the top. So there's 5 petals in a pansy. And I'm going to start about halfway up on my circle and sort of draw a triangle shape down, but I'm going to just sort of scallop the edges a little bit to make it look like a petal. All right, and we don't want them to be perfectly even. We want them to be misshapen and very natural looking. And remember, I can hear my daughter's texting me. If you hear that quacking noise, she's a duck on my phone. I'm sorry about that. I thought I turned that off, but it's all the way across the room. So anyways, all pansies look different, right? And they're a natural plant, and none of them are perfect. They're all different, so don't worry at all if your petal doesn't look just like mine. And what I'm hoping is that you'll do this project several times, and then you'll see how each one of your pansies will be different, and it'll be just like a garden of flowers. All right, so I've got the first petal here, and then I'm going to come over here on the left toward where this petal met the circle. And I'm going to draw another one sort of the same, kind of out. And I want it to just tuck into that one. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side, starting here, pulling my petal up, letting it just sort of come down and meeting this petal. So I have 3 petals now. Now I'm going to start the next petal sort of over here on this 3rd petal that we drew, and I'm going to bring it up and give it a little petally edge, and then let it touch this petal over here on the left. And then I'm going to come up here on top of the petal we just drew and bring a petal out and down. So these 2 petals on top are kind of tucked behind the 3 petals in the front. Okay, so it's very simple. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, all right? Just very simple. Then I'm going to draw 2 leaves, and I'm going to turn my paper this way. And right about here, I'm just going to draw a little line out for the center of my leaf. And then I'm going to make this little scalloped edge that comes down to the flower. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Come up, and little scalloped edge that comes down to the flower. Very, very simple. I'm going to turn my paper the other way, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'll draw a line, scalloped edge down to the petal, and then again on this side, scalloped edge down to the petal. All right, so now we have our pansy and 2 leaves on either side. I'm going to hold this up closer to the camera so you can see it. Okay, so it's pretty simple, and if you want, you could screenshot this so you have a better look. And as always, you can practice this a few times if you'd like to. And I have a little extra line here. We shouldn't have to erase, but if you do, I have a little extra line. I'm going to lightly erase that. Okay, so our drawing is now done, and we're going to jump right in, and we're going to paint some petals. So like we've done before, if you've watched other Artists for Everyone videos, we never want to paint 2 petals that are right next to one another. And the reason is that while one is still wet, and if you painted this one first, and then you went right in to paint this one would bleed into this one, and we don't want that. We want each petal to be separate. So we're going to paint this bottom petal, okay? And then we're going to paint the 2 top petals because they're the same color. And then we're going to let our painting dry before we continue on. All right, I'm going to bring back my paints and my palette. And we're going to start with a yellow color. And so in the Artists for Everyone palette, we have 2 yellows to choose from. We have the bright lemon yellow that's called Mimosa, and we have Ochre Léger, which is a pale yellow ochre. So if you don't have this set, you could use any pale lemony yellow, or you could use a yellow ochre. So it's up to you. If you want your flower to be really bright and vibrant, choose the Mimosa. If you want it to be more muted, choose the Ochre Léger or a yellow ochre. All right. I'm also going to mix up some color to paint on top of that. And for that, I'm going to use my wood violet. And I'm going to bring the wood violet over to the palette. And I want to mix a nice dark puddle of it. Because we're going to take the wood violet and we're going to turn it a little bit dark. So remember that when we want to darken or neutralize a color, we want to add its complement. And the complementary color of violet is yellow. So because I'm using the Ochre Léger, that's my choice, I'm going to take a little bit of that Ochre Léger and I'm going to add it to my wood violet, and I'll get a little bit more. And all this is going to do is sort of mute it out and make it just a touch darker, not so vibrant. All right, so now I have plenty of wood violet in there, my wood violet yellow ochre mix. Now, the first step is we want to paint a water glaze on our petal, and I'm going to start with this petal right in the center. And using clean water, I'm going to paint, avoiding those center circles, I'm going to paint a water glaze on this petal. And I put a nice reservoir of water down, and then I'm a little bit more careful around my edges, going right up to that watercolor pencil line or pencil line. And remember, you can always turn your paper if that's easier for you. It's certainly easier for me. And I turn my paper. But you can see I'm getting a nice reservoir of water, a nice water glaze on that petal. Then I'm going to pick up the ochre leger or the mimosa, if that's what you choose. I like things a little more muted, so I'm going to use the ochre leger. And I'm just going to drop that yellow into the petal and let it sort of move around. I'm going to dry off my brush and roll it to a point. And then I'm going to take the tip of my brush and coax that paint to the edges so I have a nice clean edge of the ochre leger. Take your time. Just pull that paint out to the edge so you have a nice smooth edge. And you'll notice sometimes if you use a watercolor pencil that the watercolor pencil will start to dissolve into the paint a little bit. It doesn't always completely disappear, but it does soften and it gives kind of a lovely effect. Okay, so while the ochre leger, this layer, is still wet, I'm going to pick some of that wood violet mix up on my brush, stir it up, and I'm going to touch it up here in the corners and around that little circle that we painted up next to, and kind of down this side and down this side. So look what's happening here. The paint is spreading a little bit, okay? So I can add a little bit more up here. I don't want it to completely cover the yellow, but I want it to sort of seep out and look natural. All right, that's all I'm going to do to that petal. I'm going to leave it alone now. And now I'm going to move up to these top two petals. And because I've already painted this, I don't want to rest my hand in it while I'm painting, so I'm going to turn my paper around. So for these two petals, we're going to use wood violet on its own. And if you don't have wood violet, you can use any purple watercolor. Dioxazine purple is really nice. Winsor violet is really nice. Even like a quinacridone violet, or quinacridone magenta, anything like that would be beautiful. Any purple watercolor. So you can see again that I'm putting a water glaze down. I'm going right up to the pencil line of the other petal. But even though I'm painting them both, I'm going to paint one petal at a time. So I'm using the tip of my brush to get that water glaze nicely all over this petal. I have a little too much water, so I'll dry my brush and just sort of mop up the excess. And then I'm going to take the wood violet straight from my palette and drop it into this water glaze and just let it spread. Isn't that beautiful how it just whooshes? Just like always, I'm rolling my brush dry, and then I'm going to use the tip of my brush to go around the edges and make sure that the paint has a nice clean line on the edge all the way around. Okay. So there's my wood violet on that petal. Now I'm going to do the same to this one. Because I want them to be a little bit separate, when I'm painting my water glaze, I'm going to leave a little bit of space right here where the petals meet. Now you'll see what I mean. So start with clear water. I'm going to put some water down. I'm not touching that purple paint that I just dropped in there. But I'm going to take it up to the other pencil lines very carefully. And I just turn my paper to make it easier for myself. Whichever way is comfortable for you is the way you should do it. So see, I went all over, except I left this little space between the two petals. There's a little bit too much water again, so I dry my brush, sort of mop some of that up. Then again, going straight from my palette, I pick up the wood violet, drop it in, let it whoosh around, clean my brush, roll it to a point, and then I'm using the tip of my brush to make sure that that paint goes right up to my pencil lines and gives it a nice clean edge. Now, when I come over here to where it meets the other petal, here is where I can lightly coax it up there. So there's going to look like there's a little separation between the petals, and that's what we want. Okay, very happy with that. So you see where I left just a tiny sliver of unpainted paper between the two petals, so it looks like they're separate from one another. All right, so this is all I can do in the first step, and I need to let these dry, and then we will be back to do the next layer. Okay, so my petals are now dry, and we can move on to painting these two petals. All right, so we're going to use the same colors that we used for this petal. We're going to start with yellow, and then we're going to put a little bit of the wood violet mix, so the purple with a little bit of yellow in it. And I'm going to start with a water glaze. I'll just paint the left one first. And I'll put the water glaze all over the petal. And then be a little bit more careful and pull it up to the edges of the other petals that we've already painted. And then out to the outer edge where our pencil line is. And I'm not going to go into the leaf, but just to the edge of the petal. Turning my paper. Okay, mop up any extra. And then I'm going to take the yellow ochre, the ochre leger, and drop it in and let it move all over. Got a little bit too much water, see, so I'm going to mop that up because the paint won't get strong enough if I have too much water, and I did. It's okay though, we can fix that. So then grab more of my ochre leger and continue to drop it in. So see, I'm not painting it, I'm just sort of dropping it into that water glaze. That gives me a nice delicate finish. That's a little bit mottled. It really lets the paint do its granulation thing. Then I'm using the tip of my brush to pull the paint around the edges. Wiping my brush if I need to get extra water off of it. Turn my paper and make sure that my paint goes all the way to that edge. Okay, and then I'm going to take some of this purple mix that we made, and I'm going to touch it to the very center here. And just keep it sort of really right here at the edge. We want plenty of yellow on this petal. All right, so that one's done. Now I'm going to turn my paper around and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'll start with a water glaze and paint my petal. A little purple paint on my brush. If your water is a little bit tinted, that's okay, but if it's coming off as a really strong color, then just get yourself some clean water. A little bit's all right. And sometimes a little bit even helps us to see where we've put the water. But if it's too strong, then it will affect the glaze that you put on. And we want these petals to look nice and yellow. And again, you might be using a brighter yellow, and that's perfect too, because there are some really bright pansies. And what I hope is that once you learn this technique for this flower, you can try it in all sorts of different color combinations. And you can even get a real pansy and try to draw the pansy that you have and match those colors. That's fun. So I'm going to take my ochre leger, just like last time, and just drop it in. Sam, my cat, Sam, come on. Okay. Draw my brush off and then use the tip of my brush to make sure that yellow paint goes all the way to the edges, giving myself nice clean edges. You're sort of, by going around the edges, you're sort of wicking the paint toward the edge. As it dries, it starts to fill out the whole area. Okay, pick up my purple mix again, and once again drop it just in this little section here. Okay, and that's it. So before we move on to the leaves, we're going to do one other thing. I've got a clean dry brush rolled to a point, and I'm going to take the very tip of my brush and I'm just going to pull it through that purple paint out toward the edges. So you see what happens as I get these little stripes of purple. And I'm going to turn it around and do the same on this side. So just pulling it through. Just gives it some little stripes coming out. All right. So that is all for this step. Once again, we have to turn the, I'm going to turn the camera off and let this dry. And then when I come back, we're going to paint the leaves and the center of our flower, and we're going to put some more stripes onto our petals. Okay, let it dry and then we'll be back. All right, so all of my petals are now dry, and we are going to move on to our leaves. And for our leaves, we're going to use the Viridian Green in the Artists for Everyone palette. If you don't have this, I would use a sap green, okay? And you might, depending on how bright your sap green is, you might want to add just a touch of red to it to mute it out, or even a little bit of yellow. But I'm just going to use my Viridian, and I'm going to put it into my palette with plenty of water, because I want it to be nice and light. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with the petals. We're going to use a water glaze first. So I'm going to start. The water glaze on my leaf. Excuse me, I've had bad allergies or something. All right, so I'm pulling the water glaze across my leaf, just like always. When we did the petals, same thing. Make sure I don't have any extra water. Sam, go on. Okay, and I'm going to pick up my green. It's nice and wet, and I'm just going to drop it in and see how it just flows around that water glaze. Rinse my brush, roll it to a point, and dry it off. And just like always, we're going to use the tip of our brush to go around the edge of our leaf, making sure that it fills in and gives us a nice edge. Okay? And I know I've showed you guys this before, but in case you're new to my channel, when I'm using the tip of my brush to do very fine and detailed work, I hold my brush toward the bottom of it. And it just helps me. You can find your own way. You know, there's many, many different ways to do it, but I find that works best. So now you can see I have green on the entire leaf. Then I'm going to take some Viridian straight from the pan, so it's a little bit stronger, just on the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to drop it in along the edge of the petal, where the leaf meets the petal. Okay? And I'm going to take the tip of my brush and just sort of coax it down the center where that center rib was. Dry my brush off. And then I'm going to use the tip of my brush just to sort of feather the darker green into the lighter green. Make sure my edge is nice and clean. And all this does, it gives it a little bit of variation. So it looks like the leaf is a little bit darker where it goes under the petal. And you can see I can pull some of the darker green down in the center to make that rib line. That's it. We're keeping it really simple. And you can experiment with this. You can add a little bit of yellow to your green, a little bit of blue. You can use different greens, like 2 different greens to drop into your leaf. Experiment with it. We just want a green leaf, you know, so you can do all different kinds of things. And I'm not real happy with my edge there, so I'm just kind of going over it again. Okay, so that's one leaf. And I'm going to do the exact same thing over on this side. So starting with a water glaze all over the leaf. Dry my brush off a little bit and then bring that water glaze to the edges with the tip of my brush. All the way. Okay. Pick up my green mix, drop it in all over. It's a nice coat of green. I need a little more. Dry my brush off, roll it to a point, and then use the tip of my brush to coax that green all the way to the edge of my leaf and give myself a nice clean edge. Just keep turning your paper. There. And then once again, take some of the green right from the pan and drop it at the edge where it meets the petal, just to give yourself a little bit of variation and depth there. And then pull a tiny bit down the center of your leaf. Then dry my brush off and use the tip of my brush to sort of blend the dark green into the lighter green. And again, you could try different greens, a more yellow green with a more dark green. Sap green is a great green for leaves. All right, I'm really happy with that. So my leaves are now done. All of my petals are done. And now we're going to paint the center of the flower. The very center, we're going to use some of this green that we put in our palette. And we're going to paint the very, very center circle with green. Just a light coat of it so it's nice and light using the tip of my brush. So I've got a little green circle in there. And then I'm going to use a tiny bit of the darker purple mix that we had in the beginning. So if you still have some, you can wake it up a little bit in your palette. And I don't want my brush to be really wet, so I'm going to just dab it off on my paper towels to make sure I have a nice point. And then I'm going to use the tip of my brush and I'm just going to draw some little lines through my petals, just really random little lines, just like that. And I'm going to do it on all of the yellow petals, just tiny little lines kind of coming through. to give our pansy some stripes. Very, very subtle, okay? That's all we need to do. If on this one, because it's a little bit darker, I might take a little bit of my raw umber, or you could use any raw umber or brown. So it's a little bit darker. And make those lines a little bit darker on that petal. And then I'm going to come up here with either the purple mix or a raw umber, and I'm just going to sort of rim the outer edge of that circle, just a little bit to give it some definition. All right, so the very last step for our pansy is to put some gold on it, and I'm going to use gold mica. Now, if you don't have a metallic gold watercolor, you can use an orangish yellow, something bright and golden. All right, it doesn't have to be gold. Obviously, pansies don't have gold on them. But anytime I have a chance to use gold mica, I'm going to use it. I think I need a little more water on my brush. So get some gold on your brush. Then I just want to soak some of the extra water off of it on my paper towel. And I'm going to very carefully paint that outer inner circle. The second one we drew with the gold. Let it go onto that petal just a teeny bit. There. Okay. So my pansy is now finished. Very simple project. You can try it with any color combinations that you would like to try it with. Again, you could go brighter or darker or more pastel, or you could use the Bois de Rose. You could make a blue pansy. It doesn't matter at all. You can make all the petals the same color. Some pansies are like that. I'll show you a couple other ones that I did. This one, I used a different watercolor set that I had in my studio. Okay, totally different look than this one. I used more of a magenta paint. All right, and then this one I used really vibrant colors and a really dark green. So it just depends on what you want to do, and I suggest trying all different color combinations. It's super, super fun. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you will try it in many, many different combinations and share it with me on social media. I will leave information for that in the description box below, along with all the information on materials and different combinations that you can, not combinations, but substitutions that you can use if you don't have the Artist for Everyone palette. And as always, I hope you enjoyed this, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. Thank you so, so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel so you'll get all the latest updates. Thanks so much.